A bloodied and broken alien female was left for dead, crushed under the wreckage of her craft on an uncharted world, until a human explorer discovered her mangled body and saved her life. Captain Paul Scott navigated his sleek starship, the ISS Defiant, through the void of an unexplored sector. His ship jolted as it dropped out of FTL near a rocky, barren planet with no signs of civilization. Suddenly, a faint distress ping lit up on his sensors, pulsing weakly from somewhere on the surface below. Curiosity piqued, Paul fired his thrusters and descended through the thin atmosphere, wind buffeting his hull. Cresting over jagged mountains, Paul spotted the scattered debris of an unfamiliar alien vessel strewn across a plateau. He set the Defiant down on its landing gear nearby and grabbed his pulse rifle. Exiting the airlock, Paul approached the wreckage cautiously, senses alert for any sign of a trap or ambush. But as he drew closer, he spotted a crumpled form lying motionless amidst the twisted metal. It was an alien female, her purple skin gashed open and oozing dark blood. Her left leg was crushed under a chunk of hull plating. Paul's medic training kicked in, and he hurried to her side, scanning for life signs. She was alive, but barely. Part of him screamed to leave her, that this wasn't his problem. But seeing her broken body, Paul knew he couldn't abandon her to a slow, lonely death on this remote rock. Gritting his teeth, Paul activated his exosuit's enhanced strength mode. Metal groaned as he heaved the wreckage off her ruined leg. Scooping the limp alien into his arms, Paul carried her back to his ship, as quickly as he dared. In the Defiant's cramped infirmary, he laid her on the table and activated the autodock. But as the machine scanned her, it flashed a red warning. Her injuries were too severe. She needed a real doctor, fast, or she wouldn't survive the night. Paul stared at her unconscious face, alien yet strangely beautiful. He didn't know who she was or how she'd gotten here, but he knew he had to try to save her. Returning to the cockpit, Paul plotted a course for the nearest human outpost and punched the FTL, praying he'd get there in time. Paul's shoulders slumped, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. He looked down at Tyro's bruised face, her breathing now steady. Satisfied the autodock had stabilized her for the moment, Paul turned to exit the infirmary, needing to get them to safety. But piercing alarms suddenly reverberated through the small room. His head snapped up. What the hell? Paul rushed to a glowing console, hands flying over the interface. He pulled up the long-range sensors and his blood froze. Fuck! A Hirogen warship, bristling with weapons, had just dropped out of FTL near the outpost. They were coming in hot. "Human, what is happening?" Tyro's raspy voice demanded from behind him. Paul whirled to see her struggling to sit up, eyes wide with fear as the alarms continued blaring. He hesitated, not wanting to reveal the direness of their predicament to his injured patient. "It's nothing, just lay back down and let the autodock work." "Do not lie to me," Tyro snarled, baring sharp teeth. "I know those alarms. A ship approaches, and I doubt they come as friends." Paul sighed, rubbing his forehead. He reluctantly moved aside so she could see the pulsing red dot on the screen. "It's a Hirogen warship. They just arrived in system." Hey, calm down!" Paul gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You're in no condition to go anywhere, and I'm not about to hand you over to them." Tears welled in Tyro's eyes as she shook her head frantically. "You don't understand. I fled. I deserted my post. They ordered me to slaughter helpless civilians on a world we conquered, innocent people, children. I couldn't do it. So I ran, and the Hirogen do not tolerate deserters. They will execute me without mercy if they find me." Paul's jaw clenched as cold realization seeped into his bones. If the Hirogen knew she was here, if they boarded his ship, he couldn't let that happen. He'd risked everything to save this alien woman's life. He wouldn't abandon her to torture and death now, even if it meant making an enemy of her ruthless people. "I won't let them take you, Tyro," he vowed solemnly. "I'll protect you, whatever it takes." Tyro blinked up at him in shock. "Why? Why would you risk yourself for me, an alien you barely know? You should give me to them, save your own skin." A spark of something that might have been hope ignited in Tyro's eyes. But the ominous blip on the sensor screen drew closer with each passing second. The warship would reach them in minutes. Tyro scoffed, her momentary hope fading. And if they demand to see my body? They won't simply take your word you'll hand me over the moment they threaten you. Paul slammed a fist against the bulkhead in frustration. Damn it, after everything I've done, you still don't trust me. I'm trying to save your life here. Tyro flinched at his outburst, conflict flickering across her angular features. I want to believe you. Truly. No one has ever stood up for me before. I'm just afraid. Paul's anger cooled at the raw vulnerability in her voice. He reached out to grasp her hand, ignoring how she initially stiffened at his touch. Tyro, look at me. I swear on my life, I will not betray you. We'll get through this together. Okay? Tyro searched his face for a long moment, as if judging the conviction behind his words. Finally, she gave a single, jerky nod. Okay, she whispered. I will follow your lead. The comms unit crackled and popped, the signal of an incoming transmission. Paul squeezed Tyro's fingers once before moving to answer the hail, praying to any gods that might listen that his desperate gambit would work. He had to make the Hirogen believe his lies, or everyone on this outpost would pay the price. With a deep breath, he opened the channel. Paul's finger hovered over the button to open the comm channel to the Hirogen warship. He glanced back at Tyro, seeing the fear in her eyes. With a deep breath, he pressed the button. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a hulking Hirogen commander, his face a mass of scars and piercings. Human vessel, you will surrender the deserter Tyro to us immediately, the commander growled without preamble. Paul forced his voice to remain steady. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Tyro was killed in the crash. I only managed to recover her body. The Hirogen's eyes narrowed. You lie. Scans show a living Hirogen biosignature on your outpost. Your scans are mistaken, Paul bluffed. Tyro is dead. But if you insist, you're welcome to send a small boarding party to verify it for yourselves. My outpost's facilities are limited, so don't bring too many. The commander leaned forward, baring his fangs. Very well, human, but if we find you have deceived us, the consequences will be severe. The screen went black. Paul sagged, his knees weak with relief. But there was no time to rest. He raced to the infirmary where Tyro lay. We have to move now, he urged, helping her to her feet. I bought us a little time, but not much. Tyro swayed, clutching her side. I will only slow you down. Leave me. Not a chance. Paul slung her arm over his shoulders, supporting her weight. They stumbled into the corridor, Tyro's breaths coming in pained gasps. As they navigated the maze of hallways, Tyro's gaze bored into him. Why are you doing this? Risking your life for me? You could just hand me over and save yourself. Paul huffed a laugh. Don't go singing my praises just yet. We're not out of this. A deafening boom rocked the outpost, alarms blaring to life. Paul's head snapped up, dread coiling in his gut. Over the comm, a voice crackled with static. The Hirogen have breached the airlock. They're storming the outpost, a whole damn army of them. I won't let them take you, he promised. Grabbing a pulse rifle from the weapons locker, he checked the charge. And I won't let them slaughter the people here. I'll hold them off as long as I can. Paul, Tyro's voice broke. You can't fight them all. It's suicide. Paul's jaw clenched as he chambered around. Then I'll take as many of those bastards with me as I can. Lock this door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. Tyro reached for him, but he was already turning away. Heart-pounding, rifle clutched to his chest, Paul strode out to face the oncoming Hirogen horde, ready to make his final stand. Pulse blasts streaked through the air, scorching the walls as Paul ducked behind a crate. The Hirogen had breached the outpost's defenses, their hulking forms storming down the corridors with single-minded purpose. Paul leaned out from cover, squeezing off a burst from his rifle. A Hirogen warrior staggered, armor sparking before crumpling to the ground. But more took its place, heedless of their fallen comrade. Paul's heart pounded as he realized the civilians hadn't finished evacuating. He had to buy them more time. Rising to a crouch, he laid down a suppressing fire, trying to funnel the Hirogen into a choke point. The aliens adapted quickly, splitting into two groups to flank him. Paul pivoted, blasting the nearest warrior, but another closed in from the side, energy blade humming. He turned too late, knowing he couldn't get his rifle up in time. Suddenly the Hirogen jerked as a plasma bolt took it in the temple. It collapsed, revealing Tyro standing behind it, a salvaged Hirogen blaster in her hands. Her face was set with fierce determination. "I thought I told you to stay put," Paul snapped, even as relief flooded him. "And let you have all the fun?" Tyro limped to his side, favoring her injured leg. "Not a chance." They fell into a seamless rhythm, Tyro's precise shots complementing Paul's spray of suppressing fire. Hirogen fell before their onslaught, unable to advance in the face of the human and Hirogen's combined skill. But more kept coming, an unending tide of armored bodies. Paul's rifle beeped, power cell nearly drained. He slammed his last backup cell home, knowing it wouldn't last long. "We can't hold them forever," he shouted over the din of battle. "Then we don't try," Tyro replied grimly. "The hangar bay is close. We get these bastards to chase us, lead them away from the civilians." "We'll need a ship," he said, already moving. "I know just the one." Tyro's smile was sharp. "Bet the Hirogen won't expect us to steal one of theirs." They burst into the hangar in a hail of blaster fire, Hirogen hot on their heels. The angular grey bulk of a Hirogen shuttle squatted in the nearest berth. Pulse blasts pinged off its armored hull as the pair sprinted up the ramp. "I'll manage." Tyro strapped into the gunner's chair, powering up the weapon systems. "Just get us in the black." The shuttle shuddered as Paul fired the thrusters, throwing them back against their restraints. The ship tore free of the hangar, Hirogen blasts streaking past the viewports. "Punch it!" Tyro barked. Paul did, the shuttle's engines screaming as they clawed for open space. The boxy grey forms of Hirogen ships wheeled to pursue, cannons hammering their aft shields. Tyro returned fire, the shuttle's guns thundering. An enemy ship bloomed into flame, but three more swept in to take its place. "They're still coming." Paul yanked them into a stomach-churning roll, barely evading a crackling ion blast. "I see that," Tyro snarled, hands dancing over the weapons console. Another pursuer fell away, sparks venting from its hull. But the Hirogen commander's ship bore down on them, its guns hammering shot after relentless shot into their shields. Alarms shrilled as the barriers flickered, taxed to their limit. Paul's mind raced, trying to formulate some plan, some way out of this. But everywhere he turned, the Hirogen were there, cutting off escape. They couldn't run forever. Sooner or later the Hirogen would catch them, and when they did... He glanced back at Tyro, seeing his own weariness and desperation mirrored in her eyes, but beneath that he saw a glimmer of something else, the same stubborn refusal to surrender that had first drawn him to her. She met his gaze, understanding passing between them. The Hirogen had hounded her, had slaughtered and terrorized, and now, together, they had a chance to strike back. To show this merciless foe that they would not go quietly. "I have an idea," Tyro said, voice hard with purpose, "but you're not going to like it?" Paul's hands tightened on the controls as plasma blasts hammered at their shields. The commander's ship loomed on the viewscreen, death in every stark line of its hull. "I'm all ears," he said. "What did you have in mind?" Tyro told him. Paul swore even as a fierce, reckless grin split his face. It was a plan born of desperation, of the knowledge that they had nothing left to lose. But if it worked... They'd struck a blow against the Hirogen that the brutes would never forget. "Let's do it," Paul growled. Tyro nodded, something like respect kindling in her eyes. Together they bent over the shuttle's controls, plotting the coordinates for a jump that would either save them. Paul's hands flew over the shuttle controls, sweat beading his brow as the roar of pursuing ships thundered behind them. Hirogen blasts scorched their shields, the jolts vibrating up through the deck plates. A massive asteroid field loomed ahead, a tumbling labyrinth of jagged rock. A desperate, reckless plan ignited in Paul's mind. "Hang on!" He wrenched the control yoke, plunging the shuttle into the treacherous maze. Tyro's claws dug into her seat as the asteroids hurtled past, near misses shaking the hull. "Are you insane? We'll be pulverized." Paul's jaw clenched as he jinked and juked, narrowly dodging a spinning mountain of stone. "Those Hirogen boats are too bulky, too slow. They'll never follow us in here." On cue, a chasing ship clipped an asteroid, shearing off into a fiery pinwheel. Two more slammed together with a titanic crunch, vanishing in a plume of flame and shrapnel. But the commander's vessel doggedly remained, blasting through the rocks with single-minded fury. Tyro hissed, talons tapping her control board. "I have an idea. Hirogen sensors have a weakness, an override frequency. If I can spoof it, make them think we're debris." Tortured screeches filled the cabin as yet another near miss scraped their hull. Paul gritted his teeth, G-forces slamming him as he corkscrewed around a tumbling asteroid. "Whatever you're going to do it fast." The shuttle shuddered, alarm screeching, shields down to 20%. Tyro worked furiously, fingers flying, eyes narrowed in concentration. With a final jab, she snarled in triumph, "Got it! Broadcasting the false signal, now!" An eternity passed. The commander's guns hammered their failing shields. Then silence. The Hirogen ships veered off, scanners sweeping, searching. "They bought it," Paul sagged back, not quite believing. "They think we're space junk." "Never underestimate Hirogen arrogance," Tyro spat, "or their stupidity." Paul angled them out of the asteroid field, watching the Hirogen return to the outpost. Satisfaction warred with worry for the civilians there, but one crisis at a time. "We did it, we're clear." A smile cracked Paul's face, giddy relief bubbling in his veins. The console chose that moment to explode in a shower of sparks. The cabin lights flared, dimmed, then snuffed out entirely. Groaning, the shuttle's engines wound down with a descending whine. "We've lost main power," Tyro snapped, her fists pummeling a dark, unresponsive board. "Primaries are shot, secondaries failing." Paul stared at the looming sphere of a barren moon, their trajectory bending inexorably towards its pitted surface. "Strap in," he ordered, hands already working to wrestle some control from the dying ship. "Looks like we're setting her down, whether we want to or not." The shuttle hit atmosphere in a blazing shroud, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, as it knifed through angry grey clouds. Paul clutched the yoke in a white-knuckled grip, fighting to keep them level, to bleed off speed. A patchwork of craters and jagged hills rushed up to greet them, the terrain a blur. With a bone-jarring crunch, the shuttle belly-flopped onto the unforgiving rock, ploughing 100-meter furrow before lurching to a stop. Ears ringing, Paul shook his head to clear it. He turned to Tyro, a quip about his landing skills on his lips, but froze. Slumped in her chair, a thin trail of blue blood seeped from the alien woman's temple. Her eyes were closed, her face as still as death. "Tyro? Tyro?" No response. Fear clenched Paul's heart like a frozen fist. He lunged for her, fumbling to find a pulse, to feel breath against his cheek. There, the faintest shallow rise of her chest. She lived still. Paul sagged, dizzy with relief. Now he just had to keep her that way. Unstrapping from his chair, Paul gathered the limp Hirogen in his arms and kicked the buckled hatch. It screeched open, admitting a blast of frigid, thin air. Overhead, unfamiliar stars glinted in a strange sky, cold and uncaring. A lonely wind moaned across alien hills, the only sound on this desolate world. But there, on the near horizon, angular towers jutted from the dust, too precise to be natural formations. Lights glimmered in those distant windows, signs of civilization. Shelter, aid, hope. Cradling Tyro close, Paul took his first steps onto the bleak moon, striking out for those beckoning spires. Behind him, the gutted ruin of the shuttle crackled and popped, already forgotten. This place, wherever it was, would either be their salvation or their tomb. The wind howled. Paul walked on into the unknown, Tyro a precious burden in his arms. Step by inexorable step, he trudged towards the promise of those distant lights, the stars his only witness and his only guide. The eerie towers loomed closer, alien angles and strange architecture unsettling in the wan starlight. Paul's sore legs burned with each leaden step, Tyro heavy in his aching arms. But he pushed on, teeth clenched against the pain. They had to make it. He had to get Tyro help, nothing else mattered. Staggering up a scree-strewn hill, Paul reached the crumbling walls of the mysterious compound. Up close it was clearly long abandoned, the metal pitted and scored, gaping holes blown in the structures by some ancient battle. Crabbing sideways, Paul squeezed through a torn gap, finding himself in dank, debris-choked corridors. Shadows hulked in the gloom, twisted wreckage and strange devices looming out of the dark. The air was stale, thick with a cloying scent that caught in Paul's throat. Somewhere deep in the ruin, the lights he'd seen from afar still glimmered. Holding Tyro tighter, he ventured deeper into the labyrinth, the oppressive darkness swallowing them. The lights drew him onward, past collapsed passages and strange cyclopean chambers. His footsteps echoed in the sepulchral silence, Tyro's breathing a ragged counterpoint. A flicker of motion in the corner of his eye. Paul whirled, heart pounding, but only dancing shadows met his wild gaze. Unease prickled his skin, the sense of unseen eyes crawling his spine. He shook it off, pressing on with renewed urgency. But with each step the air grew thicker, fouler. A bitter metallic reek coated his tongue. The chamber was a charnel house. Mounds of alien bones littered the floor, piled in choking drifts. Shattered equipment and strange devices lay strewn amidst the remains, as if torn apart by terrible force. Scorch marks and jagged holes pocked the walls, the cold violence of millennia past etched in stark relief. And there, on a raised platform in the center of the ossuary, the source of the lights. A towering structure of hoses, pipes, and blinking consoles thrumming with malevolent purpose. Sickly fluids pulsed through transparent tubes, viscous and putrid. Paul's skin crawled, his every instinct screaming to flee this foul place. But Tyro shuddered in his grasp, her breath failing. Jaw clenched, Paul advanced into the bone-carpeted room, the sinister machine drawing him in like a fly to a spider's web. Reaching the dais, he eased Tyro down amongst the remains of the long dead, hands shaking as he fumbled for a medkit. A whir, a click, a rising hum. Paul spun, pulse rifle leaping into his hands, and found himself staring into the glowing optical sensors of a spindly robotic drone, skeletal limbs tipped with wicked blades. Behind it, a dozen more powered up, scuttling out of the dark on spidery legs. Unlimbering weapons, they encircled the platform, cold and implacable. Paul's finger tightened on the trigger, eyes flickering from drone to drone, mind racing. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. But he wouldn't let them take Tyro. He wouldn't fail her now. Snarling a wordless battle cry, Paul charged the deadly android phalanx, opening fire in a hail of plasma bolts. Tyro was depending on him. He would save her, or die trying. Paul charged into the robotic phalanx, pulse rifle blazing. Plasma bolts stitched a line of destruction through the drones, scattering metallic limbs and sparking circuitry. He dropped into a slide, narrowly evading a scything blade, and came up firing, blasting the head off another android. Tyro leapt into the fray, Hirogen blaster spitting deadly energy. She moved with fluid grace, spinning and dodging, each shot finding a critical weak point. The drones fell before her onslaught, crashing to the bone-strewn floor in heaps of twisted metal. Together the human and Hirogen fought their way deeper into the eerie complex, a trail of shattered robots, marking their passage. Paul's muscles burned with fatigue, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but he pushed on, fueled by desperation and adrenaline. At last, they burst into the central control room, a cavernous space dominated by towering consoles and flickering screens. Panting, Paul sealed the blast doors behind them, buying a moment's respite. "Okay, we're in," he said, scanning the alien controls. "Let's find out what these bastards are up to and shut it down." Tyro nodded grimly, moving to a glowing terminal. Her claws flew over the keys, deciphering the arcane Hirogen script. Suddenly she hissed in shock, pupils slitting. "Pop, it's worse than we thought." She stepped back from the screen, a hologram blooming to life above it. Schematics and formulas scrolled past, each more horrifying than the last. The virus in all its terrible glory laid bare. "This thing, and it's not just deadly," Tyro said, voice tight. "It's adaptable, designed to infect and wipe out entire species, while leaving the Hirogen unscathed." Paul stared at the projection, ice crystallizing in his veins. A biological weapon of unimaginable scope and cruelty, tailor-made for genocide. "My God, and we have to destroy it, every last trace." He turned to the control panels, hands hovering over the unfamiliar keys. Tyro joined him, studying the outpost's systems. "There must be a way to purge the viral samples, overload the containment failsafes. If we can just—" Her claw jabbed a button. Instantly, alarm klaxons blared, crimson light pulsing in the dim chamber. A robotic voice boomed from unseen speakers. "Containment breach detected. Outpost self-destruct sequence initiated. T-10 minutes to critical overload." "Shit!" Paul slammed a fist against the console. "We triggered some kind of fail-safe." "The explosion will vaporize the surface, but there's no guarantee it will destroy the virus samples," Tyro said urgently. "They're stored in a specialized containment facility, designed to withstand even a direct blast." Paul ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. "Then we need to get to that facility and physically destroy it. It's the only way to be sure." Tyro hesitated, then nodded. "I remember seeing the containment specs in my military briefings. It's deep in the sub-levels. We have to hurry." They sprinted from the control room, following Tyro's directions through the labyrinthine corridors. The clock ticked inexorably down as they ran, each second an eternity. Rounding a corner, they skidded to a halt, coming face to face with a squad of Hirogen warriors. The hulking aliens roared in challenge, energy blades igniting. "Intruders! The commander wants their heads!" Paul and Tyro dove for cover as the Hirogen opened fire, disruptor beams sizzling through the air. Robotic drones, drawn by the commotion, scuttled out of adjoining passages, forming a deadly crossfire. "We're trapped," Tyro snarled, returning fire from behind a sparking console. "We'll never reach the containment facility in time." Paul gritted his teeth, pulse rifle bucking in his grip as he dropped 2 drones. His gaze fell on a flickering control panel nearby, Hirogen script scrolling across it. A desperate plan crystallized. He lunged for the panel, stabbing commands into the keys. With a tremendous groan, a massive blast door slammed down from the ceiling, cutting the corridor in 2. The Hirogen howled in rage, pounding on the unyielding metal. The drones skittered and clawed but could not pass. "That won't hold them for long," Paul said, ejecting his rifle's spent power cell. "But it buys us a chance. Let's move." They raced onward, the drumbeat of the Hirogen pursuing. At last they reached a huge circular vault, its gleaming surface etched with dire alien warnings. "The containment facility," Tyro breathed. She keyed a complex code into the access panel, and the vault door ground open with a hiss of escaping pressure. Inside, rows of cylindrical tanks bubbled and churned, sickly green fluid roiling within. Pipes and hoses snaked between them, pulsing with viral slurry. Paul stared at the abominations, revulsion twisting his gut, weapons of genocidal malice hiding in plain sight. Tyro's eyes flashed with sudden understanding. "The virus, it's not just a weapon. It's the key to the Hirogen's plans for galactic domination." Paul turned to her, brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I thought it was just cruelty, a terror tactic, but it's more than that." Tyro's voice shook with growing horror. "The Hirogen have been testing this virus on the worlds they conquer, perfecting it, evolving it. They mean to unleash it on a galactic scale and rule over the ashes." Cold realization settled in Paul's bones like lead. The scope of the Hirogen's evil defied comprehension. The clang of boots on metal drawing closer, the guttural snarls of the hunters eager for blood. "We have to end this, now." Paul unslung a satchel charge from his belt, keying the detonator. "We blow the tanks, collapse the chamber, bury this obscenity forever." Tyro nodded grimly, producing her own explosives. They moved among the tanks, placing the charges at critical structural points. The march of the Hirogen echoed from the corridor, the screech and chitter of drones. "Charges set," Tyro called, backing toward the exit. 30 seconds. Paul armed the final detonator. He turned to run. Thand found himself staring into the glowing eyes of a drone, its scythe-like claws raised to strike. Paul's eyes widened as the drone's blade slashed down. He rolled desperately, metal sparking against the deck plates where his neck had been an instant before. Coming up in a crouch, he fired point-blank into the machine's optical cluster. It staggered back, circuits sizzling. "Paul," Tyro's warning shout. He whirled to see a hulking silhouette filling the doorway, a nightmarish figure in spiked armor. The Hirogen commander. "You thought you could destroy my life's work, human," the commander snarled, stalking forward. "Thought you could deny the Hirogen our rightful place as the galaxy's apex predators?" In his fist he clutched a vial of roiling green liquid, the virus in its purest, deadliest form. "Your species will be the first to burn." The commander's finger hovered over the vial's release catch, but not before you watch your precious alien bitch choke on her own blood. "No!" Paul lunged, tackling the Hirogen in a desperate bid to stop him. They crashed to the deck, grappling like wild beasts. The vial skittered from the commander's grip, rolling toward the bubbling tanks. Tyro dove, snatching the vial a hair's breadth from the edge. She rolled to her feet as Paul and the commander traded hammer blows, smashing each other into the unyielding metal walls. Paul fought with the strength of desperation, but the Hirogen was a force of nature, as relentless and powerful as a landslide. A crushing knee to the ribs drove the breath from Paul's lungs. Stars burst across his vision as an armored fist cracked against his temple. Through ringing ears he heard Tyro's voice, taut with urgency. "Hold him, Paul, just a few more seconds." Blinking away the fog, Paul glimpsed Tyro at the containment controls, her claws flying over the keys. She was trying to overload the tanks, to burn away the virus before the commander could unleash it. But the Hirogen was too strong, his rage too great. He smashed Paul to the deck, clawed hands closing around his throat. The edges of Paul's vision darkened as the commander's bulk crushed the life from him. Paul's hand groped blindly, searching for anything, any weapon to stave off his onrushing death. Fingers brushed metal, closed around the grip of the commander's fallen blaster. The commander stiffened, mouth opening in shock. Then he toppled sideways, 2 smoking holes punched through his back. Tyro stood over them, the blaster trembling in her hands. Her eyes met Paul's, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them. A deep subsonic rumble shook the chamber. The containment tanks pulsed, cracks racing up their sides. Tyro hauled Paul to his feet, slinging his arm over her shoulders. "To the Overlord, it's going critical." She dragged him toward the door, the world pitching and swaying. "We have to go now." Alarms shrieked as they staggered through the shuddering corridors, the outpost tearing itself apart around them. The stolen shuttle loomed ahead, ramp lowered and beckoning. They tumbled inside, Tyro's claws slamming the hatch closed. Paul collapsed into the pilot's chair, hands flying over the controls on pure instinct. The shuttle lurched, clawing for the sky as the complex imploded behind them. Fire chased them into the stars, a wall of blazing destruction that consumed the virus, the commander and every trace of the Hirogen's vile works. And then they were free, streaking away from the doomed moon, the nightmare fading into memory. But even as Paul sagged back in his seat, he knew their fight had only begun. The Hirogen would never stop hunting them now, not until their foul empire lay in ashes. He turned to Tyro, seeing his own grim resolve etched in every line of her face. "We have to warn them," she said softly. "The other species, the Council, they have to know what the Hirogen have done, what they're planning." Paul nodded, a cold, righteous anger kindling in his heart. "We'll make them listen. We'll find a way to stop the Hirogen." He reached out, clasping her hand in his, a human and a Hirogen united against a common foe. Worlds to save, battles to fight, and a reckoning to deliver, no matter the cost. The battered Hirogen shuttle shuddered and groaned, as Paul fought to keep it on course. Smoke wafted from damaged consoles, sparks sputtering in the dim emergency lighting. Tyro hunched over the navigational controls, her claws clicking frantically. "Nearest Allied outpost is still light years away," she growled. "And the way this scrap heap is flying, we'll be lucky to make it out of the sector." Paul gritted his teeth, wrestling with the unresponsive yoke. "Just keep us pointed in the right direction. We have to get this intel to the Council, no matter what." But even as the words left his mouth, a shrill alarm pierced the air. The shuttle's engines coughed and sputtered, power levels plummeting. "We're losing propulsion," Tyro snarled. "Some kind of cascade failure in the reactor core. We need to set down now or we'll be drifting Hulk." Paul scanned the star charts, searching for a glimmer of hope. A small unnamed planet blinked on the holomap, a desolate rock whirling around a guttering red sun. "There!" He punched in the coordinates. "It's the only option in range. Strap in, this landing won't be pretty." The shuttle knifed into the planet's thin atmosphere, hull glowing cherry red. Paul hauled back on the controls, fighting to bleed off speed. Bare, rust-colored mountains rushed up to greet them, jagged peaks shrouded in swirling dust. With a bone-rattling crunch, the shuttle slammed into a flat expanse of rock, skidding and bouncing. Gradually it ground to a halt, creaking and groaning as it settled. Paul slumped back in his chair, breath ragged. Tyro unfolded from her crash harness, a new bruise purpling her jaw. Tyro just snorted, limping to the airlock. She hit the door controls and a blast of hot, arid wind swirled into the cabin. "We must work fast," she said grimly. "Repair what we can and get off this rock. The longer we linger, the greater the chance the hydrogen will pick up our ion trail." Paul nodded, grabbing his tools. Together, the human and Hirogen trudged out into the crimson desert, the sun glowering balefully overhead. They searched for anything they could use to patch up the ship, scavenging scattered bits of scrap metal, stripping corroded wiring from boulders split open by extremes of heat and cold. But pickings were slim. As Paul straightened, stretching his aching back, something caught his eye. A glint of metal jutting from the sand. Not the broken remnants he'd grown accustomed to, but something whole, something constructed. "Tyro, look at this," he called, brushing away the dust. Slowly, a shape took form beneath his hands, a smooth, curved hull of some dark alloy, emblazoned with strange glyphs. Tyro crouched beside him, tracing the unfamiliar script with a claw. "This is ancient, but not naturally weathered. Looks like it was buried deliberately." She looked up, eyes narrowing. Paul followed her gaze to a sheer cliff wall nearby. At first glance it seemed like any other rock face, but now he could discern two regular shapes beneath the obscuring sand, faint outlines of what might once have been doors and windows. "Ruins," he breathed, "which means—" "Resources," Tyro finished. "Technology, answers." Activated by renewed purpose, they delved into the ruins, prying open long-sealed doors to reveal twisting corridors choked with sand and debris. Statues loomed out of the shadows, strange insectile figures clutching unfamiliar weapons. Faded murals depicted battles against hulking armored foes. With a chill, Paul recognized the distinctive armor, the cruel, tusked faces. "Hirogen," he whispered. "They were here on this world centuries ago from the look of it." Pressing on through the eerie, tomb-like silence, they finally reached what could only be a central chamber. Towering pillars surrounded a raised dais, upon which rested something. Scattering centuries of sand, they climbed the plinth. There, still glowing with a feeble inner light, sat a podium of sorts, an ancient computer perhaps. Tyro bent to the ornate controls, hands dancing across keys untouched for eons. With a flicker and hum, the device stirred to sluggish life. This is a record of this world, its people." Her voice caught. "Of the Hirogen. They came as conquerors, just as they did to my world. Slaughtered the inhabitants, stripped the planet of resources. And not their first." Tyro flipped through the star charts, each annotated with glyphs that could only mark the path of a relentless advance. This was part of a campaign, A crusade, stretching back centuries, world after world, all falling to the Hirogen war machine. They shared a look of grim understanding. "This is it," Paul said softly, "the proof we need to show the galaxy what the Hirogen truly are." A distant boom shook dust from the ceiling. Another, closer. The sound of heavy footfalls, of guttural voices barking commands. "They found us," Tyro snarled, snatching up her blaster. "Must have tracked our entry burn." Paul grabbed the other gun, checking the charge. Distantly, he wondered how many times they could cheat death before their luck ran out. But staring into Tyro's eyes, seeing the defiant fire there, he pushed such thoughts aside. They would fight, as many times as it took, together. Screams and blaster fire erupted from the outer chambers, the harsh bellows of Hirogen warriors, the chilling whine of energy weapons. Crouched behind an overturned slab, Paul and Tyro poured plasma into the Hirogen as they surged into the room. Armor cracked and flesh burned, but more always came, heedless of their fallen. "Fall back," Paul shouted over the din, "to the rear chamber." They leapfrogged from cover to cover, one laying down suppressing fire while the other dashed to the next position. Blaster bolts crackled past, near misses searing hair and skin. A glancing shot spun Paul around. He crashed to the sandy floor, head ringing. Through swimming vision he saw Tyro pivot, blasting his attacker to bloody shreds. "On your feet, human," she growled, dragging him up. "I won't let you die until we make these bastards pay." Paul shook his head clear, forcing his legs to pump. They sprinted down a shadowed passageway as Hirogen warriors thundered after them. Skidding around a corner, Paul yelped as the floor crumbled away. Tyro hauled him back from a dizzying drop, some kind of ventilation shaft plunging into darkness. "No way forward," she spat. "We'll have to make a stand." Behind them, guttural war cries echoed from the twisting corridors. The heavy tramp of boots, the electric sizzle of priming weapons. They were trapped, pinned down. Paul met Tyro's eyes, saw his own desperate defiance reflected back. No words were necessary. They knew what they had to do. As one, they spun to face the charging Hirogen, guns blazing. Aliens fell screaming, but more trampled over the bodies, tusked faces contorted with rage. A hammer blow struck Paul's shoulder, hurling him back. He slammed into the wall, blaster flying from nerveless fingers. Tyro roared in fury, scything down his attackers in a storm of plasma. But even she couldn't hold back the tide. A crackling net snared her legs, sending her crashing to the ground. Hirogen boots stamped down, pinning her thrashing form. Through a red haze of pain, Paul saw her straining against her bonds, teeth bared in a silent snarl of defiance. A Hirogen commander loomed over her, plasma rifle leveled at her head. Tyro spat blood, eyes burning. "We've already beaten you, savage. The galaxy will know of your crimes. Your foul crusade ends here." The commander's tusked face twisted into a vicious sneer. "Oh no, little rebel, it's only just begun." There's rough hands dragged him away. Paul locked eyes with Tyro one last time. In her defiant gaze he saw no hint of defeat, no flicker of fear. Only a promise, a vow, that no matter what came next, no matter what they endured, they would never stop fighting, never stop resisting. The Hirogen had revealed their true face today, their true monstrous nature. And Paul and Tyro would not rest until the galaxy knew it too. Dragged through the ruins, out into the blazing crimson light of the dying sun, Paul and Tyro were hauled towards a waiting Hirogen shuttle, its engines growling like a crouched predator. As the warriors flung them into a cramped, stinking cargo hold, Paul caught a final glimpse of the blood-red sky, the ancient structures sinking once more beneath the shifting sands. The Hirogen had snuffed out an entire civilization here, buried their crimes beneath the uncaring dunes. But now their dark history would be thrust into the light. Paul and Tyro would make sure of it. Though they might suffer, though they might die, the truth would out. The Hirogen's hidden evil would be laid bare. No matter the cost. With a shuddering roar, the shuttle blasted free of the dead planet's feeble grasp. The ruins dwindled away, slipping beneath the churning dust. but not out of memory, not out of legend. The Lost World story, the truth of the Hirogen's atrocities, was seared into Paul and Tyro's souls now. And they would carry that flame forward, that spark, that burning need for justice, until the Hirogen answered for all they had done, until the monsters were brought to heel. The Hirogen shuttle shuddered and groaned, its hull pitted by energy blasts. Smoke billowed from ruptured conduits as Paul wrestled with the unresponsive controls. Tyro, hunched over the sparking navigational console, plotted their approach vector. Allied outpost dead ahead, transmitting clearance codes now. With a final sputtering cough, the shuttle limped into the outpost's hangar. The landing gear crumpled on impact, sending Paul and Tyro tumbling across the deck. Dazed, Paul staggered to his feet, offering Tyro a hand up. She clasped it, her grip strong despite the exhaustion etched on her angular features. A squad of armed soldiers surrounded the battered craft, weapons trained on the hatch. It screeched open, revealing Paul and Tyro's battered forms. "Don't shoot," Paul called, raising his hands. "We have vital intelligence for Admiral Zone. The fate of the galaxy is at stake." The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, but before they could respond, a gruff voice boomed across the hangar. "Stand down, men, I'll handle this." The soldiers parted, revealing a grizzled figure in a crisp uniform. His weathered face was a map of scars and creases, his eyes sharp beneath bushy brows. Admiral Zone strode forward, his gaze flicking from Paul to Tyro and back. "You have some nerve barging in here uninvited, and with a Hirogen no less." "Admiral, please," Paul said urgently. "We have proof of the Hirogen's crimes, a conspiracy spanning centuries. We must act before it's too late." Zone's eyes narrowed. "Bold claims. I hope you have evidence to back them up." "More than you can imagine," Tyro said, stepping forward. She held out a data chip, the secrets of the ancient ruins encoded within. "The blood of entire civilizations is on the Hirogen's hands, and they won't stop until the galaxy is theirs." Zone took the chip, weighing it in his palm. He glanced at Tyro, suspicion warring with curiosity in his gaze. "I'll review this data," he said at last. "If it's as damning as you claim." He trailed off, his expression hardening. The Galactic Council must be informed. This could change everything. Paul sagged in relief, the weight of their long journey lifting ever so slightly. "Thank you, Admiral, we—" A klaxon blared, red lights flashing. Zone's comm crackled to life, a panicked voice echoing through the hangar. "Admiral, long-range sensors have detected a massive Hirogen fleet dropping out of warp. They're on an intercept course, weapons hot." Zone cursed, his hand flying to his sidearm. He rounded on Paul and Tyro, eyes blazing. "You led them right to us," he snarled. "This outpost is a sitting duck." "Damn your evidence," Zone roared. "I have civilians to evacuate, a battle to fight." He jabbed a finger at Paul's chest. "You want to help? Make yourself useful. My fighters need every pilot they can get." Paul met Tyro's gaze, a wordless understanding passing between them. They had come too far to fail now. "We'll do more than that," Tyro said, her voice hardening with resolve. "We'll take the fight to the Hirogen." Zone barked a laugh, harsh and humorless. "A suicide mission? You're crazier than I thought." Paul's jaw tightened. "It's the only way. We'll hit their flagship, draw their fire, buy you time to get your people to safety." Zone hesitated, torn, but another explosion rocked the outpost, the deck shuddering beneath their feet. "Blast it, there's no time to argue," he growled. "Hangar C, end of the corridor. You'll find a shuttle prepped for launch." He thrust the data chip back into Tyro's hand. "Get this to the Council. Don't let our sacrifice be in vain." With that, he spun on his heel, barking orders into his comm as he ran. Paul turned to Tyro, adrenaline surging through his veins. "You heard the man. Let's give these bastards a fight they won't soon forget." Tyro's smile was fierce, her eyes alight with the promise of battle. "I thought you'd never ask." They sprinted for the hangar, pulse rifles in hand. Around them, soldiers and civilians alike scrambled for escape pods, the outpost disintegrating under the Hirogen's relentless assault. They reached the shuttle, hurtling inside and sealing the hatch. Paul slid into the pilot seat, hands flying over the controls. "Strap in," he called over his shoulder. "This is going to get bumpy." The shuttle roared to life, engines flaring. It leapt from the hangar, plunging into the maelstrom of battle. Irigen ships swarmed like angry hornets, disruptors spitting green death. The outpost defenders fought back valiantly, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Paul jinked and wove, narrowly evading the deadly onslaught. Tyro manned the shuttle's guns, returning fire with grim determination. And there, at the heart of the chaos, loomed the Hirogen flagship. A monstrous vessel bristling with weaponry, it dwarfed the other ships like a wolf among sheep. "That's our target," Paul said, his voice tight. "We breach the hull, fight our way to the bridge, take out the command crew." Tyro's fingers danced over her console, plotting their approach. "I'm picking up a weak point in their aft shields. If we come in hot, we might just punch through." Paul nodded, his grip tightening on the controls. "Then let's give them a welcome they'll never forget." The shuttle streaked toward the flagship, engines screaming. Disruptor fire stitched the void around them, a lethal web of energy. "Now!" Tyro yelled, slamming her fist on the console. A salvo of torpedoes erupted from the shuttle's launch tubes, detonating against the Hirogen's hull in a blinding flash. The flagship shuddered, its shields collapsing with a crackle of failing energy. A gaping hole yawned in its armored hide, edges glowing molten. Paul plunged the shuttle into the breach, metal screeching as they skidded to a halt in the cavernous hangar beyond. Alarms wailed, Hirogen warriors pouring into the bay. Paul and Tyro leapt from the shuttle, weapons blazing. Back to back, they fought like demons, pulsefire felling Hirogen left and right. But for every warrior that fell, two more took their place, a tide of armored bodies threatening to overwhelm them. "We have to keep moving," Paul panted, slamming a fresh power cell into his rifle. "The bridge won't take itself." Tyro bared her teeth in a feral grin, her own weapon spitting death. "Then by all means lead the way." They carved a path of destruction through the flagship's corridors, Hirogen falling before their relentless advance. Bulkheads shattered, conduits ruptured, the very ship quaking around them. At last, they reached the bridge doors, a towering portal of reinforced alloy. Tyro slapped a breaching charge against the unyielding metal, priming the detonator. "Fire in the hole!" she yelled, diving for cover. The charge blew, shredding the doors like paper. Paul and Tyro stormed into the smoke-filled bridge, rifles leveled. And there, rising from the command throne like a colossus, stood the Hirogen High Commander. He was a titan, clad in ornate battle armor of burnished crimson. Trophies of slaughtered foes adorned his massive frame, grisly tokens of 1,000 conquests. In his fist, he clutched a crackling energy glaive, its blade sizzling with barely restrained power. "Insolent whelps," he roared, his voice like thunder. "You dare defile my ship? Slay my warriors?" Paul leveled his rifle, finger tightening on the trigger. "Your reign of terror ends here, monster. The galaxy will know of your crimes." The High Commander threw back his head and laughed, a sound of pure malice. "Foolish human, you cannot stop the Hirogen. We are the apex predators, the true masters of the cosmos." With a snarl, he leapt from the dais, glaive flashing. Paul and Tyro dove aside, the deadly blade cleaving the air where they'd stood a heartbeat before. The High Commander pressed his attack, a whirlwind of slashing steel. His elite guard surged forward, forcing Paul and Tyro back with a barrage of disruptor bolts. Tyro cursed, her rifle clicking empty. She cast it aside, drawing a pair of wicked-looking blades from her belt. "Paul," she called, tossing him one of the knives, "take the guard, leave the big bastard to me." Paul caught the blade, its hilt warm in his palm. He nodded grimly, squaring off against the advancing Hirogen. Tyro turned to face the High Commander, a snarl twisting her lips. The massive Hirogen loomed over her, glaive poised to strike. "Treacherous wench," he growled, his eyes glinting with malice. "I will flay the hide from your bones and mount your skull in my trophy hall." With a roar, the High Commander lunged, glaive scything down in a blur of crackling energy. Tyro leapt aside, the deadly edge missing her by scant centimeters. She darted in, blades flashing. The High Commander parried with contemptuous ease, his every move a study in brutal efficiency. They traded blows in a deadly dance, sparks flying as steel clashed against energy. The High Commander's strength was monstrous, each blow sending shockwaves up Tyro's arms. But Tyro was fast, her lithe form weaving between the slashing glaive. She scored a glancing hit, her blade drawing a thin line of blood across the High Commander's cheek. The Hirogen roared in fury, redoubling his assault. His glaive moved in a dizzying pattern, a web of sizzling death that Tyro could barely evade. A hilt slammed into her gut, driving the air from her lungs. She staggered, momentarily stunned. The High Commander seized his chance, glaive arcing down in a killing blow. Tyro threw herself aside, the crackling blade slicing a deep furrow across her thigh. She screamed in pain, stumbling to one knee. The High Commander loomed over her, glaive raised for the final strike. A pulse blast seared the air, catching the Hirogen in the shoulder. He staggered back, armor smoking. Paul stood over the fallen bodies of the elite guard, rifle aimed squarely at the High Commander's head. "Get away from her, you bastard!" he growled, finger tightening on the trigger. The High Commander laughed, a sound of pure malevolence. "Pathetic human. You think you can stand against the might of the Hirogen?" He lunged, glaive slashing. Paul fired, pulse bolts stitching the Hirogen's armor. But the High Commander barely seemed to feel them, his rage propelling him forward. Paul barely got his knife up in time, the glaive's crackling edge skittering off the metal. The force of the blow sent him reeling, stars exploding across his vision. The High Commander pressed his advantage, glaive hammering down in a relentless barrage. Paul gave ground, desperately parrying the brutal onslaught. A twist of the Hirogen's wrist sent Paul's blade spinning from his grasp. An armored boot crashed into his chest, slamming him to the deck. The High Commander towered over him, glaive poised for the killing blow. His eyes glinted with sadistic glee. "And so it ends," he gloated, "a fitting death for a mewling whelp." The glaive plunged down, aimed at Paul's heart. He screwed his eyes shut, bracing for the searing agony of the blade piercing his flesh. A wet crunch, a choking gasp. Paul's eyes snapped open, widening in shock. Tyro stood behind the High Commander, her face a mask of hatred. Her blade protruded from the Hirogen's chest, buried to the hilt in his back. "Die, you filth!" she snarled, twisting the knife. The High Commander convulsed, glaive tumbling from nerveless fingers. He slumped to his knees, dark blood bubbling from his lips. With a final gurgling breath, he toppled forward, sprawling across the deck in a clatter of armor. Tyro swayed, her own wounds taking their toll. Paul lurched to his feet, catching her before she could fall. "I've got you," he murmured, supporting her weight. "We did it, we won." The deck shuddered beneath their feet, a deep groan echoing through the hull. Alarms blared, red light pulsing in time with the klaxons. "Warning," a flat mechanical voice intoned. "Critical damage detected, reactor containment failing, detonation imminent." Paul's head snapped up, dread coiling in his gut. He keyed his calm, desperate hope surging in his chest. A burst of static, then Zone's voice crackled over the channel. "Negative, defiant, all ships are engaged or destroyed, no rescue possible." Paul's heart clenched. Beside him, Tyro squeezed his hand, her expression grim. "Admiral," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "The data, did you get it to the Council?" A pause, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Affirmative," Zone said at last. "The truth will out. The Hirogen will answer for their crimes." Relief flooded Paul's veins, a sweet balm even in the face of impending death. They had done it. Their mission was complete. "Godspeed, you two," Zone replied, his voice thick with emotion. "It's been an honor." The channel went dead, leaving only the wail of the alarms. Paul turned to Tyro, drinking in the sight of her. "Looks like this is it," he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "One last adventure." Tyro huffed a laugh, wincing as the motion pulled at her wounds. "I can think of worse ways to go. At least we face it together." The flagship bucked and heaved, explosions tearing through its hull. Bulkheads crumpled, decks collapsing in on themselves. Paul and Tyro clung to each other as the world disintegrated around them, a maelstrom of fire and shrieking metal. And then, with a blinding flash and a roar that shook the very fabric of space, the reactor detonated. The flagship vanished in a searing ball of plasma, a miniature sun blooming against the starfield. Debris hurtled in all directions, molten fragments of hull and vaporized hydrogen. Amidst the tumbling wreckage, a battered shuttle tumbled, its occupants still clinging to each other as the shockwave carried them into the void. Consciousness faded, the blackness of space reaching out to embrace them. But even as oblivion beckoned, Paul and Tyro held fast to one final shining truth. Though the dark had taken them, the light of their sacrifice would burn forever. A beacon, that even in the deepest night hope would endure. Paul sagged against the co-pilot's chair, his blood slicking the cushions. Each breath sent daggers of pain lancing through his perforated chest. The shuttle's engines whined with strain, consoles sparking and smoking around them. Tyro hunched over the controls, her claws flying over the flickering keys as she fought to keep them airborne. At last, the towering spires of the Galactic Council's headquarters loomed before them, a shimmering beacon of light amidst the stars. Tyro guided the crippled shuttle into the landing bay, the deck crews scattering as they came in hard and fast. Metal screeched against metal as they skidded to a bone-jarring halt. Tyro was at Paul's side in an instant, slinging his arm over her shoulders and hauling him up. Together, they limped down the ramp and into the cavernous hall beyond. Delegates from 100 worlds lined the chamber, a sea of alien faces etched with curiosity and trepidation. At the center of the room, a raised dais awaited, the council's leaders already in heated discussion. Tyro and Paul approached the podium, the eyes of the galaxy upon them. With trembling hands, Tyro slotted the data chip into the terminal, the damning evidence springing to life on the holoscreens above. A chorus of gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembly as the extent of the Herogen's atrocities was laid bare. Grainy footage of conquered worlds, of cities reduced to rubble, and populations enslaved or massacred. Schematics of the viral weapons, each more horrific than the last. "Esteemed councillors," Tyro began, her voice ringing out across the chamber, "for too long the Hyrogen have preyed upon the innocent, crushing world after world in their relentless pursuit of dominance, but no longer. Today, we bring before you the truth of their crimes, the blood they have spilled, the lives they have shattered." She gestured to Paul, who stood swaying at her side. "This human risked everything to help me escape the Herogen's clutches. Together we uncovered the depths of their evil, the centuries of suffering they have inflicted. We come before you now to plead for justice, for an end to the Herogen's reign of terror." Silence fell, heavy and charged, as Tyro's words hung in the air. Then a lone figure rose from the council seats, his features twisted with disdain. "You speak of justice, traitor," the Herogen delegate spat. "But all I see is a deserter and her human pet, spinning tales to save their own hides." Shouts of agreement echoed from the Hyrogen's allies, a tide of dissent rising to drown out Tyro's testimony, but she stood firm, her eyes flashing with righteous fury. "Silence!" a booming voice cut through the clamor. The council's chief adjudicator, an ancient being swathed in flowing robes, stepped forward. "The evidence is clear. The Hyrogen stand accused of crimes beyond reckoning. This council will deliberate on the matter and—" A hissing whine split the air, followed by a strangled cry. The adjudicator staggered back, a smoking hole seared through his chest. He crumpled to the floor, dead before he hit the ground. Chaos erupted, delegates screaming and diving for cover as blaster fire stitched the chamber. Herogen assassins, their stealth generators shimmering, materialized amidst the panic, weapons blazing. "Get down!" Tyro roared, shoving Paul behind the podium. She snatched a fallen guard's blaster, returning fire with gritted teeth. Paul forced himself upright, his vision swimming. He staggered to Tyro's side, his own weapon in hand. "I'm with you," he gasped. "To the end." They fought like demons, back to back, their weapons spitting plasma into the ranks of the assassins. Hirogen fell, their armor smoldering, but more took their place, a relentless tide of death. A searing lance of pain exploded in Paul's gut. He looked down, seeing the blackened hole in his stomach, the blood pouring from the wound. His legs folded, the strength fleeing his body. "Paul!" Tyro screamed, catching him as he fell. She cradled him in her arms, her eyes wide with anguish. "No, no, stay with me!" Around them, the battle raged on, the council guards rallying to drive back the assassins. But Paul barely noticed, his world narrowing to Tyro's face above him, the tears glistening on her cheeks. "Tyro," he whispered, his hand finding hers. "We did it, we won." She shook her head frantically, pressing her palm to his wound. "Don't you dare leave me, Paul, don't you dare." He smiled weakly, his vision darkening at the edges. "Meeting you, fighting beside you, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'd do it all again, 1,000 times over." Tyro's breath hitched, a sob tearing from her throat. "I can't do this without you, Paul. I need you." Paul's fingers tightened on hers, his gaze boring into her own. "Yes, you can. You're strong, Tyro, stronger than you know. You have to keep fighting, keep telling our story. Don't let the galaxy forget. Promise me." Tears streaming down her face, Tyro nodded jerkily. "I promise, Paul, I promise." He smiled, a final, peaceful expression. "That's my girl," he breathed. I love—" But the words died on his lips, his hand going slack in hers. His eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling, the light fading from their depths. Tyro threw back her head and howled, a sound of pure, raw agony that echoed to the stars. She clutched Paul to her chest, rocking him gently, her tears falling like rain on his motionless face. Around her the chamber fell silent, the last of the assassins lying dead or subdued. The councillors emerged from their hiding places, their faces etched with shock and sorrow. "The human sacrifice will not be forgotten," the chief adjudicator said solemnly, his robes stained with his own blood. "Nor will his courage in bringing the Hirogen's crimes to light. This council finds the Hirogen Empire guilty of unspeakable atrocities. They are to be stripped of their power, their leaders brought to justice, and their conquered worlds freed at once." "I'll make them pay, my love," she whispered, her voice hard as steel. "I'll burn their foul empire to ashes, I swear it." She laid Paul down gently, her claws trembling as she closed his eyes for the last time. Then she rose, turning to face the council with fire in her eyes. "The Hirogen's reign of terror ends now," she snarled, her voice ringing with righteous fury. "And I will not rest until every last one of their crimes has been answered for. This I vow on the blood of my beloved Paul, and on the graves of every soul they have slaughtered. Let the galaxy tremble, for the reckoning has come at last." You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.